Welcome to Classic Car Chat. I'm Paul Watson, host and producer, and I'm here at Orphan Car Garage in Abington with John Wingle, proprietor and self-professed foster father to many classic cars. We're going to go inside and talk about some classic cars, so don't go away, and we'll be right back and have a Classic Car Chat. Well, we came inside and we're getting ready to do a Classic Car Chat. But first I wanted to introduce you all to John Wingle, proprietor here at Orphan Car Garage, and just get a little bit of his car background. Now, we have done a little bit of taping around previously, and you told a little story about what kind of really got you first interested in cars. You want to tell people about that a little bit?
Yeah.
Just don't go the whole thing, because you'll spoil it when we bring that other segment up.
Basically, it's been in my blood since I was born. My mother would tell me that before I could even talk or walk, that I was into cars. She could just tell. So that just kept culminating, and when I was 13 years old, I bought my first car from paper route money that I had earned. I had asked a customer of mine about a car that was in their driveway, an Oldsmobile convertible. And they, after badgering them for about a year, they finally sold me the car for $150, which was a lot of money to a 13-year-old kid. Convinced my mother, who knew that I was a car guy from birth, to let me use my paper route savings money to buy the car at 13 years old, God love her. And it just kept growing from there until we have what you see today.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you actually have room to use it anywhere when you got that car?
That's the problem. We didn't have a garage. We lived in Massachusetts, so we have climate. And the car, as much as I babied it and resurrected it from where it was from the previous owner, I still couldn't give it the love that it needed. So I actually sold that Oldsmobile before I even had a driver's license, and turned cars around quite a bit over the next few years before I moved away from home and was able to afford working full-time, afford rental garages and so forth, before I could buy my own house with a garage.
Now, when I was growing up, we had a family in the neighborhood that was like a gentleman farmer. He was an engineer for General Dynamics, doing shipbuilding, of all things. And his oldest son used to buy these clunkers and run them in one of the fields down in the back of the house, just round and round in circles.
Yeah.
Practicing for NASCAR by the looks, because he never went the right-hand circle. It was always the left hand.
Maybe it didn't. I've heard stories like that a lot. Unfortunately, I wouldn't have been able to do that because behind my house was a cemetery. So it wouldn't have been that great of an outcome to be running junk cars through the cemetery. I think the police would have had an issue with that.
Yeah.
So I had to settle for the cul-de-sac at the end of my street. And thankfully, my neighbors were forgiving.
Now, taking a step on from there, what made you actually start working in the car business?
I graduated from high school. I wasn't interested in college right away. Having an interest in cars through my whole childhood, I knew I wanted to be around cars. Didn't quite know to what capacity. So a brand new Chrysler Plymouth dealer was opening up in the next town from where I grew up, and they were looking for help in all departments. I went and applied. They hired me right away to be in their reconditioning shop. So for about 3 months, I worked as a reconditioner at a Chrysler Plymouth dealer. Soon after that, the parts manager threw out his back, and they needed somebody to go in and run the parts department. At that point, I barely knew what a spark plug or a head gasket looked like, but I learned. It's kind of like your father showing you how to swim by throwing you in the lake.
Yeah.
And it was all going to be temporary. I'm going to go to college. I'm not going to stay at the dealership forever. 33 years later, I was still doing parts department work in car dealerships until I was finally able to break away and do this full time here at Orphan Car Garage. So kind of by chance.
How many car dealers did you? Well, maybe I should ask you this: did you work for all the major?
Most
lines?
of my career, 99.9% of my career, was with Chrysler Plymouth Dodge. So when that first dealership I was at was a Chrysler Plymouth dealer, and I just kind of earned a reputation, and I made contacts through those avenues. So I was always not always moving around. I think I worked in total of the 33 years, maybe five dealerships, all Chrysler Plymouth Dodge, with a short stint at Mazda. But I migrated back to Chrysler, Plymouth, Dodge, Jeep, and that's where I was when I ended my career in the dealerships, which was now about a year and a half ago.
So why did you decide to start being a purveyor of premium classic cars?
Well,
you can't buy your teeth off the shelf, you know.
Say that 5 times fast. Even though I was working with the new cars for 33 years, my passion was always with the old cars. The new cars really never lit my fire, but it paid my bills. I knew early, when I was younger, I needed that to pay the bills because buying and selling vintage cars weren't going to pay the bills. I had I had a mortgage and a car payment. And so after 33 years of the business, I realized that I was done with it. I literally burnt out of it. I just didn't want to do it anymore. It wasn't for me. It was becoming more corporate. It was becoming more and more difficult to make people happy. I wanted to make myself happy. And people around me were getting older, getting sick. I saw what was happening, So I decided you only live once. Break free, do what you really want to do, and make yourself happy. It was a risk, but I took it, and so far it's paying off.
Oh, that's good.
Thank you.
What's your favorite car to go shopping for?
Anything that's unusual, unique, or eclectic.
Well, that certainly fits what this place is.
Yeah, you'll see that. Yeah, you'll see that as we go along. I don't go running after Mustangs or Camaros or Corvettes, and you'll see why when we get to the.
They can see the Edsel behind us.
Yeah,
so that gives them a good clue.
Yep, perfect example of that.
What's your favorite classic car?
Anything from a company that didn't have a lot of means to do what they needed to do to compete with the competition. And by that I mean the true orphan brands. Studebaker, I have tons of respect for Studebaker. They had a tough road to try to compete with Ford, GM, and Chrysler because they had big bank accounts. And Studebaker,
they also had very well engineered cars, I've heard.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what they did with their low budget was amazing to me. And same with AMC, American Motors, Nash, Hudson Rambler. The things that they did over the years to compete, to do what they did with a small budget is amazing to me, and you'll see that as we go around. So I have a ton of respect for those companies, and I enjoy those cars today. And there's so few of them out there now because most of them got used up and abused and thrown away because they were very inexpensive used cars in the 60s and 70s. So to find a pristine one today is difficult and rare. So if I get one and I sell it to someone, I always say, you're going to be the only one at the cruise night with one of these. The guy with his 6-figure Corvette's going to be sitting in his folding chair with his arms crossed, and the whole crowd is going to be around your Nash Rambler. And it's proven. It's been proven. I've witnessed it.
Well, I can tell you this, just in the research I've been doing to start this thing up, there are some huge Rambler Metropolitan clubs just for the Metropolitan.
The Metropolitan. I had one of those here, right about where we're sitting. There was one here for about a year and a half, and it sat here, and that's good because they're great to look at. They're wonderful to look at. They put a smile on everybody's face. They're a cool car. They have a great story. But to actually get in one and drive one on today's roads was a little bit of a challenge. It's almost like getting into an early Volkswagen Beetle. You know, they have about 60 horsepower, and everything's manual. So fun to look at. Nothing against them. On the right roads, they're the right car. But for where we live here in Metro Boston area, they're a little bit tedious to drive on today's roads. Yeah. So it was great to have sitting right here to look at. Because every day I came in and I smiled, because it is a car to make you smile.
Well, now I think it's time we probably stopped and talked about a couple of cars.
Sounds good.
So we'll be right back. Don't go away. And we've got a couple of beautiful classic cars for you to take a look at. The first car we have to show you today is one that was not too well known by a lot of folks until Pixar's Cars came along. Especially the character that was voiced by Paul Newman, Doc Hudson. What we have here is a Hudson Hornet. Very famous car in NASCAR circles.
Yep.
And this is probably, what, one of the tail end of the
So
vehicles that were produced.
So this is kind of codenamed a hash, because this Hudson was produced after the merger of Hudson and Nash in 1954. So the Doc Hudson Nash Hudson that you just mentioned was pre-merger. So
Yes.
Pre-1955.
Well, those who know, just taking a look at that character on the screen, knew that looked like the early Hudson, because it had that shaped with that curved rear end.
This doesn't have that.
No.
Truthfully, this Hudson is really just a rebadged Nash.
Hence the term hash. They made a hash out of it. Okay.
And the reason for that was the Hudson plant in Detroit was outdated, needed a lot of work, and the Nash plant in Kenosha, Wisconsin was far more advanced. So they made the decision at the merger to bring all the production for both Nashes and Hudsons to Kenosha.
And that
which
Kenosha
were already
plant,
building Nashes.
Yeah, that Kenosha plant was a huge place too.
Yes, employed the whole area.
Well, now we can get into a little bit about the more classic Nashes, because they had a very unique style to them, a unique engineering. They called it the step down, because when you got into the car, you had to step down to get into it.
The Hudsons,
the Hudson, because the floor was set so that the floor level, instead of being on top of the frame rails, was in the middle, and the floor level was at the bottom rail on the thing, because it gave it a lot more stability.
Gave it stability, a lower center of gravity, and it was more protection for the passengers, because the perimeter frame around the vehicle actually encircled the passenger. So it was an added protection, almost side protection, because you sat so low around the frame.
Which helped.
This car is not part of that step down.
And that floor sitting in there with the lower center of gravity and all was one of the things that made it so stable for racing.
NASCAR.
Yeah.
Yep, they dominated NASCAR.
They had the truth in Pixar. The Nashes, the Hornets were, a lot of racing was done with those.
Yeah.
And you know how
in real life too.
You know how NASCAR got started, don't you?
No.
It was the bootleggers. They had all these souped up cars to outrun the police, to deliver the alcohol, and they decided to get together and race and see whose car was the fastest. And they were starting on dirt tracks and things like that down south, and if you had a lower center of gravity, odds were you weren't going to tip over on one of those tight turns.
Right, and that was a Hudson.
Yep. And another interesting thing I found out about was the fact that the Hornet was a 6-cylinder.
Yeah.
And it beat out 8 cylinders in the race, cylinder engines in the races.
Yep.
And because they had a little bigger bore on the cylinder and a longer stroke, so they got a lot more compression out of it.
And they had a twin H carburation, so there was actually 2 carburetors on that 6-cylinder engine, so it gave it some more oomph.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, the engine that they used in the original ones was the engine that was in the precursor to the Hornet, the Super 6.
Right.
So, I mean, when you got something good, you don't throw it away necessarily.
Plus, they didn't have a whole lot of money. We mentioned that earlier in our conversation. They didn't have a whole lot of money to develop new powertrains every 3 years, like maybe the big 3 did. So they did with what they could, and they did a pretty good job, I think.
Yeah. And one of the other things that I can remember from when I was a kid was the body coverings over the rear wheels.
Yeah.
And, I always thought when I was a kid, how do they get the wheel off if they need to change it? Because all the nuts are up underneath this thing. But it was a panel that came off.
Yeah, and most everything pre-war and even just after the war, when they just rehashed pre-war designs for the cars when the war was over, had those big, huge pontoon fenders, front and rear, which encompassed that covering for the rear wheel. And they had running boards. All that was gone by the very early 1950s, late 1940s.
Yeah. Well, that's about when I came along, so that's why I can still remember them. Okay, there were also some other things inside, especially on the.
Yeah. So like I said, this car is really a badged Nash underneath it all, and Nash was pretty innovative early on, they introduced the first economy car in the American. The Rambler, the Nash Rambler of the early 1950s was really the first American economy car. And we know what happened with that genre of cars. It really took off. And it was Nash that kind of brought it here, started it here. But they had other innovative features too, and one that carried on through the merge and carried on through AMC well into the 1960s, and that was seats that reclined fully and turned the whole interior of the vehicle into a bed.
Yeah.
And this car does that.
They actually had cars that were sold to businessmen, salesmen on the road so that they could sleep in the car and not spend money in the hotel.
Yeah, the whole idea was just that. The whole idea was that a family of four, and they advertised this in their print advertising, a family of four could travel cross country in this vehicle and not have to spend money on a motel. The four of them could sleep in the vehicle. The dealership could sell you accessory window screens. So in the summertime, you could roll the windows down and snap in screens here to keep the bugs out. They also sold you an accessory mattress, Nash twin bed.
Oh my goodness! Now this makes this car really unique, I'll bet.
Yeah, so you could fold the seats back, make yourself a complete bed in there, and then roll out this, not an air mattress, but it's sort of a feather mattress across the top for more comfort. You could buy these accessories at the dealership.
Yeah.
I just happen to have one.
Army cot mattresses,
Yeah,
about that thick, right?
Right, exactly. And it was said that no dad wanted his daughter to date a guy with one of these cars for obvious reasons.
Obvious reasons. Now, there's another little thing in the back seat there that I find intriguing, and that's the fold-down armrest.
Which is about as wide as today's rear seat in total, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could put two people rest their arms on that and still put the drinks in the middle.
Yeah.
So.
Although we didn't have cup holders.
No.
That would have been ingenious back then, but they didn't do it.
Well, you can't win everything.
You can't win everything, but the armrest is pretty impressive, yeah.
That seat is also wide enough so that you could probably fit two people on either side of that armrest.
Yep. Maybe a tight
Two small
kids.
people.
Yeah, two children, two full-size adults, one on each side.
That brings back memories of the days when I was a kid and it was a rainy day and we couldn't walk to school and the parents would get all the kids in the back seat and say, "You sit forward, you sit back." So we were all kind of squeezed in like bricks.
No seatbelts.
No seatbelt. They didn't even have seatbelts then.
No, there's no seatbelts in this car.
Yeah.
No padded dash,
Yeah, well, we can talk about the padded dash a little later because we're going to be moving up a little bit.
Yeah, that became mandated at some point, but not in 1956. When
there was a lot of safety things that came along a little bit later.
Yep.
Yeah, and there were also some interesting things. Talk a little bit about the. Let's move up so we can actually see it. About the front grille, because that was.
They called it V-styling. It was just sort of a styling technique that Hudson took over for the design of this rebranded Nash. They called it V-styling, and it lasted for 3 years, 55, 56, and 57. I guess the idea in mind was to show that the car was available with a V8 engine.
Yeah.
Although they weren't all. A lot of these were the six-cylinder that you mentioned. Even these.
V8s were usually an accessory after. You had to. It wasn't the stock engine with the car.
No, six-cylinder would have been the stock engine. This car does have the optional V8.
Yeah.
So many have said that these V insignias kind of lend to the fact that the car could have a V8. And in the early mid-1950s, V8s were new. Prior to that, everything was a straight 8.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a new thing, a new cool thing, a V8.
Like the straight 6, because that's what they were making.
Right.
So, because that was when we were talking earlier about the initial engine for the first Hornets was a straight 6.
Yes. Yep.
And
they got a lot of
eventually you
power
get the
out of
V8
that. Yeah, Hudson did a great job getting a lot of power out of that 6.
It also changed the whole look of the front end. It looks more like it was smiling now, where the original Hornet looked like it was an aggressive car.
Right. This particular car is a 56, and 1957 would have marked the end of Hudson as a brand. It also would have marked the end of Nash.
Yeah.
So Hudson and Nash brands ended in 1957, and Chrysler. AMC then just focused completely on Rambler, and everything was a Rambler Ambassador, a Rambler American, a Rambler Metropolitan.
Yeah.
Gone was the Hudson name, sadly, and the Nash name after 1957. The 56 and the 57 Hudson Hornet look almost identical, a couple of little styling changes. I think maybe the hood ornament, something else. This particular car I got, I'm the third owner of this car. The second owner of this car purchased it in 1972. I purchased it from him last year. So I'm the third owner. Came out of Denver, Colorado. It's a completely original car, original paint, original chrome, original interior. It's never been restored, which is what I like.
Yeah. And another interesting thing they did here was they didn't put the name of the model in little letters somewhere and hide it on the side. They put a big thing on it. We'll get a shot for you of the insignia down on the back door. And it's not small.
Yeah.
Like
they were proud.
They were proud of those guys. Yeah. I mean, especially with the way they gained their fame on the pre-NASCAR stock car racing.
Right.
So.
Right.
Okay. Well, that's about all we have for the Hornet. We'll be back in a minute with something that's a little bit further along the line. As a matter of fact,
from the same
parent
company.
Same parent company. Well, we told you we'd have something for you that was a little bit more recent than the Hornet. So we have the AMC Matador. Now, this was kind of like continuing on from the Rebel when they decided to change things around a lot, was what they were saying about the Matador.
Right, yeah.
Because it was kind of a muscly car for what was supposed to be an intermediate price thing.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yep. And this was the last year of this design, 1978.
Yeah.
Which ran from 74 to 78.
We're talking about, the Hornet being a NASCAR champion. Well, this car was a NASCAR champion too, and they'd never marketed it that way.
No.
I mean, this could have been the muscle car for AMC, but they decided they wanted the Javelin.
They went with the Javelin instead, and they kind of made this a personal luxury car instead, personal luxury coupe. So to compete with some of the new stuff that GM was coming out with in 1973, the Colonnade design cars, Cutlass Supreme, and things like that.
Yeah, because it's funny that because they did like a major redesign for the 74s. Dick Teague, who was the lead designer, decided he was going to make the slope on the back a little more gradual. And if you ask me, you take a look at the side of this car now, it looks fast. Just standing still, it looks fast.
Yeah. Many different opinions on the look of the car. You ask 10 people, you get 10 different reactions, which is the perfect reason for me to own it.
And it has indented headlights too, so that was an interesting thing.
Yeah.
Because all the headlights had a little bit, because they had that chrome ring around them, but this is back in there. It's back inside, about 6 inches.
And then when you had the government mandated 5-mile-per-hour bumpers that extend out ridiculously far, it makes the headlights look even deeper.
Yeah, and that they were the ones that did the shock absorber in the bumper.
Right, yeah.
And they put the plastic filler in between the front end of the car and inside the bumper.
Well, some did. But AMC did not with this.
Yeah, well, it's funny, that. I was looking at pictures as I was reading up about these, and I remember some of the ads that they did, because they would show, because that was the first time that bumpers were required to have energy absorbing, so that a 5-mile-an-hour hit would not do any damage to anything. And that plastic in there, when they showed the close-up in the ad, you could see the plastic kind of crumple, and then when it left off, it'd come right back out flat again.
They say within 24 hours it bounced back to normal.
Well, for the advertisement, they had it happen immediately.
It sounded good.
Yeah. And the ones that, they also had the rubber pads on the front of them too. I don't know, did this one have the rubber?
Yep.
I can see it around there.
Nerf strips.
Big, And plus
the
the big 6-inch rubber thing.
Strips. Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that happened when the National Highway Traffic Safety organization, whatever it was,
yeah.
decided that they wanted to protect people more.
Protect people and protect the environment, because in 1972, 3-ish, emission standards started to also come into play, which really hurt horsepower.
Well, also there was the gas embargo in '73, which made them want to be producing smaller engines that would use less fuel.
Right. Ford couldn't keep Pintos in stock that year.
Yeah.
People were trading in their large gas-guzzling V8s for Pintos in Vegas.
Yeah, we all remember those, and some of the things that went on with those cars was something else too.
Yeah, that's a whole different story for another day.
We were talking, about the Hornet being a NASCAR winner, and there was one year, 73, 74.
Yeah, somewhere like that.
When the Matador won 5 of the Winston Cup Series races.
I knew that it was a winner. I didn't realize it was that much.
Yeah.
Mark Donahue.
Mark Donahue, Bill Ellenson. They were the 2 drivers, that were driving these things that were the winners. Between the 2 of them, they took 5 cups home.
Oh, that's great.
So
little old AMC.
And the Matador, which wasn't supposed to be the muscle car.
No, right. But by then the Javelin was pretty much done, so it was kind of the lone soldier in the AMC lineup. It was really all. I think the last year for the Matador was '74. So the Matador and the Javelin ran together for only 1 model year. This design coupe, only 1 model year. Then in '75, it was kind of the lone soldier, so it kind of had to become.
And all the muscle cars had pretty much disappeared by then anyway.
Yeah.
Of course, they keep coming back a little bit every now and then.
Oh yeah, they've had a resurgence, but less and less so in the early to mid 1970s as emission standards and oil embargoes, and less interest in horsepower and more interest in fuel economy.
Yeah. Now let's talk a little bit about this, because this is the Barcelona model.
This was the Barcelona edition, which was
a little bit high-end.
A little high-end, a little bit more cushy, a little bit more style. AMC, again, like we mentioned earlier, didn't have a lot of money to do some of the things the big 3 did, so they did what they could on a small budget. So they had designer series cars. You may remember that they had Levi interiors, they had Levi edition Hornets and Gremlins. They had designer series Matadors, and you could get a Barcelona edition like we have here from 1976 through 1978.
Yeah. One of the things that made it the Barcelona was the coloring.
Two-tone and the upholstery. It's like your grandmother's living room. It was not an inexpensive car, because I think the base price of this car, base, with no options, was about $4,700. This particular car with the Barcelona package and some of the goodies that it has brought the price up to $7,300. So this was a $7,300 car, brand new in 1978. Now today we think, oh, $7,300, that's it. But in 1978, that was a fairly expensive new car, and it has crank windows. You couldn't get power windows in one of these cars. It does have a lot of other convenience features, but not even power windows, and it was $7,300.
And this was not the only designer car. They have the whole line, talking about the Levi's. Gucci, Bill Blass.
Well, Bill Blass wasn't AMC, I don't think. He kind of did Lincoln's. He did Lincoln's.
He also did was it?
Oleg Cassini.
Oleg Cassini was the one that did the Matador.
Yes.
And that was a unique.
There was an Oleg Cassini Matador coupe available. Yeah.
A white car. I mean, it was basically all white. And in the interior, you had black and copper. And there was supposed to be copper accents.
Yes.
And I looked at the pictures, and it looks like it's silver to me. It doesn't look copper, but the carpet was
copper-colored carpet. You'd think it was faded. You'd think it was supposed to be a different color, and it faded over time. But no, that's how it was supposed to be.
Yeah. There's jet black seat, dashboard, steering wheel. The panels on the doors were all black, but the carpet was copper.
And I think the headlight bezel trim was copper, and I think the hubcaps, the wheel covers, had copper inlays in them, and maybe even the Landau roof in some were copper. Don't quote me on it, but I seem to recall seeing them like that.
this car, I mean, it started off kind of slow. And when they did the redesign in '74, they sold 62,000 units nationwide, where they'd only sold 7,000 the year before. So it had finally come into something.
Right.
I don't know whether it went anywhere past 74.
I think it plummeted in '75 in sales, and by '78, I think they sold right around 2,800 maybe of these cars in 1978, the last year. AMC was really struggling by then.
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons why a year or two later they got swallowed up by Chrysler.
Yeah, and the only thing that Chrysler actually took from it was the Jeep. The rest of the line just disappeared.
I correct myself. Swallowed up by Renault.
No.
Chrysler took them later in the 80s, 1987.
There was an awful lot of trading back and forth.
Renault wanted to break back into the United States and have a dealer network here, and AMC was ripe for the taking because they were hemorrhaging money by the late 1970s. This car is a perfect example of that. And so AMC welcomed Renault's cash flow. And of course, we got the Renault Alliance, which was Motor Trend's Car of the Year in 1983. Sold like hotcakes, injected money into the company, and made AMC profitable again. But that also was short-lived because the Renault Alliance didn't turn out to be a very good car, and people learned it real quick. Chrysler was in the same position Renault was in the early 80s. Chrysler was in that same position in the late 80s. They had cash flow thanks to Lee Iacocca, and they wanted the Jeep line.
And they bought a cheap line, but they bought better engineering and then never used it.
Right.
Because Nash, Rambler, and AMC, they had all very good cars mechanically.
Yeah.
They were well engineered, but when they were losing the money and they sold themselves off, the engineering just never went with the cars.
Right. Yep, exactly. This car is, going again with what I said about doing what they could with a little budget. This car is wide, it's big, but it's built on the same platform as the much smaller Hornet. And when you know that when you open the hood, the fender aprons between the fender and the engine, this wide on both sides. The same frame as a Hornet, just fattened.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's pretty ingenious because this car physically looks nothing like a Hornet. But once you open the hood, you can see that it's based on the same frame as a Hornet, doing what they could with a little budget. You know, GM would have had the budget not to have to do that. They would have come up with a whole new chassis for a new car, for the most part. AMC did with what they could, worked with what they had. And the Hornet was really just a leftover. They even kind of used some of their old framing for the Hornet when it was introduced in 1970. So it was a very old design that just kept getting reinvented.
Yeah. And now Chrysler's trying to reinvent it again by bringing out the Dodge Hornet, and we'll see what happens to that one.
Correct. They've brought back the name.
Brought back the name, but
totally new car. I think it's electric. I think it's an EV, but I'm not sure.
Really? Okay.
I think it's an EV.
Maybe that's why they gave it a name like a Hornet, because they want it to feel like a big, fast car.
Right.
And
But sadly, most of our younger buyers that are going to be looking to those EVs, like the new Hornet, won't have any recollection of the original Hornet. Maybe even their parents wouldn't know what an original Hornet was. They may have to look to grandma and grandpa to remember the original AMC Hornet, because I think those new Hornets are going to be targeted towards a much younger audience.
And even beyond the AMC Hornet, because Hudson was part of AMC.
Yep.
So that goes back a long way.
Oh yeah.
It's got quite the bloodline.
It does. It does. So you don't see many of these cars, and what I always say, when you go to a car show with a car from Orphan Car Garage, chances are you're going to be the only one there with said vehicle. And this is a perfect example of that. There weren't many built or sold, never mind how many have survived, you know.
Well, except for that 62,000 that they did 1 year. So.
Yeah.
But that was an anomaly.
Right, but you still don't see, most of them got gobbled up, turned into derby cars or race cars.
Yeah.
Became third and fourth hand used cars, bought very inexpensively and just kind of used up, especially up here in the Northeast when we have rust. Not too many of them survived.
Reminds me of my days with cable cars, the guys advertising, this is a Southern car.
Right.
Of course, if it was from, the Channel Islands down in North Carolina,
Yeah,
it was
those
still
have
gonna
their
have the
issues
rust.
too, yeah. And hurricanes and,
Yeah.
rolled back odometers. And Southern cars, they may not have the rust, but they have heat. So the interiors of those cars got crispy real quick. The plastics cracked and the weather stripping turned to dust. So they have their issues too.
Yeah. Well, that was great talking to you about the Hudson and its grandson, the Matador. And we have more cars for you coming up in future episodes. So keep your eye out and look for the new episodes of Classic Car Chat. And we'll see you next time from the Orphan Car Garage.